And the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
Thank you very much, Madame la Présidente. Merci beaucoup. I'm rising today, obviously, to speak to this important debate about Bill C-3, which will entrench civilian oversight of the Canada Border Services Agency. And following the debate thus far, I'm very encouraged by the comments that I've heard thus far from the other side with respect to the importance of this kind of legislation and its connection to the previous legislation that came forward in the last Parliament, importantly Bill C-98. Canadians know, Madam Speaker, that the CBSA is an entity and an agency that ensures Canada's security and Canadians' prosperity by facilitating and overseeing international travel and trade across our border. What is important is that it ensures the free flow of goods and people across that very border. What is critical to understand is how vast the CBSA is in its scope, Madam Speaker. It has a staff of approximately 14,000 different individuals operating a wide range of integrated border services. It operates in 1,000 locations at 117 land border crossings and 13 international airports, as well as in 39 international offices. It interacts literally with thousands of Canadians on a daily basis and millions of people yearly, including in 2017, 2018, Madam Speaker, the stats are quite staggering. 96 million travelers were processed in total during that one calendar year. That gives you a sense of the size and scope of the CBSA. Madam Speaker, I'll be sharing my time with the member for Oakville, North Burlington. What is critical to understand, Madam Speaker, and the reason why I'm rising here today on behalf of my constituents from Parkdale High Park, is that there are extensive powers that are granted to CBSA officials, and that is for good reason. They need extensive powers in order to operate and to function effectively and carry out these important functions. But with extensive powers has to come extensive accountability. This is what we would call a sine qua non, a critical component of what is required for any law enforcement agency in this country. But what is lacking up until the point of introduction of this bill and eventual hopeful passage of this bill is that accountability piece. So let's talk about those extensive powers now, Madam Speaker. When you're protecting Canadians, when it's protecting Canadians, CBSA officials have the authority to arrest, to detain, to search, to seize, as well as the authority to use reasonable force when required. At the border, as many Canadians will know, officers have the power to stop travelers for questioning, to take breath and blood samples, to search, detain, and arrest non-citizens without a warrant. These are very critical powers. These are very broad powers, Madam Speaker. This list of powers that I've just provided for this chamber underscores the critical need for oversight. When you have powers of detention, search and seizure, the use of force, which are important to the work the CBSA does, but that very work that we want to ensure is successful, would be jeopardized if the Canadian public does not have the confidence that those extensive powers are being used legitimately and appropriately in conformity with the rights that are protected in this country. There's a simple way to assure that public confidence. In legal parlance, we talk about the administration of justice or the administration of the regime being held up to wide repute. And that is to ensure that there's a transparent public oversight mechanism that is done by a civilian body. That is what I hear about from my constituents in Parkdale High Park. That is what I hear about in terms of my role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice. People believe in entrenching law enforcement with certain powers because they understand the necessity of it, but there needs to be a counterbalance, which is a check on the illegitimate or inappropriate uses of such powers which may occur in any given policing body. There's a bit of a cliche statement, Madam Speaker. It applies to virtually everything that is done, not just with law enforcement, but that the police should not be policing themselves. The investigators should not be investigating themselves. A body needs to be seen to be overseen by an external third party in order to ensure a measure of independence and a measure of neutrality. That is what we have critically with other law enforcement agencies in this country. That is what makes it so puzzling that we do not have it yet with the CBSA. So let's turn to the RCMP. CSIS, the Correctional Services Canada, they all have this independent form of review for their activities. It's critical because they have public trust in the institution because of that oversight. What is important is this bill would entrench that type of oversight, but it's also important to think about who is supporting this kind of initiative. The BC Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Council for Refugees, the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers have pointed out in numerous situations to the need for independent investigation. They've cited examples, and Madam Speaker, they are few, but they are important because of the scope of that work. As I indicated to you, 96 million travelers being interacted with in a given year. That's staggering in terms of numbers. Nevertheless, instances have arisen over the last 10 to 15 years which bear dramatic scrutiny and highlight the need for this kind of civilian oversight. In 2010, we had an individual named Kevon Phillip who was beaten to death in Toronto's Don Jail while being held in immigration detention. In 2013, we had Lucia Vega Jimenez taken into custody at the Vancouver International Airport, and it was confirmed she was found hanging in a shower stall at the airport's immigration holding center. We had Abdur Rahman Ibrahim Hassan, a 39-year-old Toronto man who was granted refugee status in Canada after coming to Somalia in 1993. He died in June of 2015 in a Peterborough hospital where he'd been taken under police escort. But he had spent 4 years at the Central East Correctional Center in Lindsay after serving a jail term for criminal conviction and was issued a deportation order in 2005. All told, Madam Speaker, since 2000, at least 15 people have died while in CBSA custody, including a 50-year-old woman who died at a maximum security prison in 2017. That legacy, that track record has prompted Amnesty International, a well-known organization whom all of us respect in this chamber, to call for an independent review body. And that call has been echoed by my constituents and others that I've interacted with, not just in Parkdale High Park, but throughout the country. And the call is simple, Madam Speaker. Let's pull back the curtain. Let's assure Canadians that the significant powers that have of necessity been granted to the CBSA to do their important work are at all times exercised appropriately and in accordance with the Charter and with Canadians' fundamental rights. Let's look at some comparators now, Mr. Speaker. So by that, I've listed a few in terms of other law enforcement agencies in Canada. And what those do is by having independent civilian oversight, that ensures that public confidence. But let's look at border service agencies in other allies, other countries that we are wont to compare ourselves to. In the United Kingdom, in Australia, in New Zealand, and France, their border services agencies are all subject to civilian external oversight. In fact, Canada is one of the few developed countries that does not have an independent review body for complaints made about the conduct of border agency staff. When we look at the Five Eyes allies, the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, again, Canada is the only member right now without an independent review body. Madam Speaker, the position and the rationale is simple. Given the extraordinary powers granted to CBSA officers and compared to all of the other public safety portfolio agencies, as well as the Five Eyes international border agencies, this represents currently a significant gap. A gap which we committed to close in the 2019 election after our previous attempts to do so in the last Parliament, as has been articulated by some of the previous speakers under Bill C-98 as it then was, were unsuccessful. It did receive, however, widespread support in this House at that time in the last Parliament, and I'm very hopeful that it will continue to receive widespread support because the simplicity of the rationale of this bill is there for everyone to recognize and to understand and to get behind. It's a gap that needs to be closed, a gap that we're closing today. In the final 2 minutes that I have, I just want to outline the importance of how this is a user-friendly mechanism, Mr. Speaker, because what it will do is it will ensure this oversight in a manner that addresses things like the recommendations that were made by Justice Dennis O'Connor in 2006 under the Meher Arar inquiry, when he called for independent oversight of border services agencies, including the CBSA and the RCMP. It would have the ability to investigate complaints received from both the public and public interest bodies and have the power to self-initiate reviews, something specifically that Justice O'Connor mentioned in his Arar Commission report. What is important is that the current situation is that people are right now facing a situation where the complaints they make about the CBSA are handled entirely internally. And we know that all told about 2,500 complaints are received by the CBSA on an annual basis. That is quite a significant amount, Mr. Speaker, but the fundamental point to understand in this chamber and for today's debate is that handling those complaints internally is one mechanism, but it is not the most robust mechanism, and is certainly not the mechanism that is applied for other law enforcement agencies in this country. What is critical is that complaints be able to be pursued by a member of the public to an external body, fundamental, but also that external body, this new public complaints mechanism, can initiate reviews on its own volition. So it doesn't require a complaint to be filed in order for it to take initiative to pursue a matter. And apropos of the examples that I listed at the start of my comments, Mr. Speaker, what is critical is that there is a serious incident protocol or a serious incident definition that is entrenched in this legislation. That includes an assault, actions of the CBSA officer that would constitute an assault, serious injury, or death, including death by a person in detention. So when we're dealing with those grave circumstances, it obviously goes without saying that the Canadian public and that we as parliamentarians require a measure of accountability to be put in place. That is the measure of accountability that is forthcoming with this legislation. That is why I'm standing in support of it, and I hope all of my parliamentarian colleagues will do the same. Merci beaucoup.